Leah wants me to remind you that you can follow the lesson on YouVersion. All right, you got the notes, you got the PowerPoint, all that stuff. And just, he spends like 2 or 3 hours, maybe even 4 hours every week doing it. So I can't blame him for asking me to remind you that it's available. Sorry, but I'm a little too tall for that thing there. There we go. Very good. Okay, great. Well, is that picture up there yet? The one behind me? No, the important picture. There we go. All right. That's what we're talking about there. Yeah, so while you all were here worshiping last Sunday, I was up in Fresno preaching for the church, and about 5 minutes before I went in to preach my sermon, I got that picture. So Jan's going to be back tomorrow night. Late, very late. So it's good to have her back. I'm sure the ladies will be glad to have her back, but I think I'll be the gladdest of all. All right, I just want to kind of follow up on the things involved with Hope with Nora. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a sort of a unified vision of what we're doing with our Hope outreach. So we have one project, which is the principal, not the only thing, but the principal thing we're doing, because as you can see in that video, you get the sense that the community there, that was in Ventura County, right? The community is becoming aware of what the church is doing because they're focusing on one particular project. And I want us to have something like that. And so the idea is the church needs to have buy-in, so that's why we're asking you to consider the possibilities. By the way, it's not an election exactly, but the Hope Board and the leadership group are going to, believe me, that we're going to listen very much to the input we get. Okay, great. So we're going on here. We're going to continue. Now, I started a series on the book of Hebrews last February, and it got interrupted by about 6 weeks. All right, so we got through Hebrews chapter 6. Let's remind ourselves. Oh, the title is Melchizedek. Who's he? All right, and might have to use your clicker. My clicker got crushed by my car. I thought it was still working. So we'll use yours. I lowered the hatch in my car about 3 times. Wouldn't close. Slammed it harder. Wouldn't close. And it was my clicker that was being slammed, so it's not too surprising it's not working anymore. Woo! Okay, well, that wasn't the problem, apparently. There we go. Awesome. All right, great. So let's remind ourselves, Hebrews was written to people who have been Christians for a while. They've been very devoted, very dedicated, given a lot to God. Persecution has come, and they're becoming a little bit tired in their faith. And they're tempted to go back to being just religious. Instead of living the life of a disciple, instead of living the devoted life that Jesus wants us to do, they're tempted to go back to being religious. Now, for them, since they come out of Judaism, their temptation is to go back to Judaism and relying on the formality and the ceremony and these kinds of things for their relationship with God. All right, and so the Hebrew writer then is asking us, as he's asking them, to stay faithful. And like we learned already, I've said this a few times, the key to staying faithful is looking to Jesus. So what the Hebrew writer does is tell us many things that make Jesus great and amazing. We saw in Hebrews 1:1 that Jesus is greater than all the prophets. We saw in Hebrews 1:4, we saw that Jesus is greater than the angels. And then in Hebrews chapter 3, greater than Moses, greater than Joshua in Hebrews 4, greater than the high priest also in Hebrews 4. And then today we're going to learn that his priesthood, the high priesthood of Melchizedek, is greater, more awesome, more amazing than the high priest and the priesthood of Aaron. Now I have to give a little background there, okay, for some of you. And then he goes on. Next week we'll see that the covenant that he established is far superior to the covenant that the Jews had, that Jesus dwells in a greater heavenly tabernacle, and that the sacrifice Jesus offers are much, much greater than anything the Jews had. And then he says, well, therefore, here's what you need to do. And we've seen some of the exhortations he gave us. We saw the exhortation to just pay attention. Don't space out. Fix your mind on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. And also we saw in Hebrews chapter 3 and 4 that if you want to make it to heaven, you need to make every effort. You can't just sort of sit back and hope you just sort of make it. And then we saw in Hebrews 5 the admonition that we need to grow up on our faith. We need to become more mature. All right? And then we'll see a couple other exhortations, but let's get into our sermon, which is on Melchizedek. Now, the title of my sermon is Melchizedek, who's he? All right? Because, who is that guy? All right, so let's go back to Hebrews chapter 5, verse 20. It says here that the law was brought in so that trespass might increase, but where sin increased, grace increased all the more, so that just as sin reigned in death, so also grace might reign through righteousness to bring in eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Oops, no wonder. You're like, what are you talking about? I've been teaching a class on Romans. Gives me a perfect excuse to remind you that our class on Romans is continuing this Saturday. And don't use the fact that you get the muffins later as an excuse to not come to the class, all right? All right. Sorry about that. Okay, what I meant to say is Hebrews 5:10. How did I get Romans 5:20 from Hebrews 5:10? I have no idea. All right, great. I'm going to go back to verse 9. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. And he was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. So the question is, what is this order of Melchizedek? Notice here it says he was made perfect. We talked about that a few weeks ago. What are you talking about? Jesus wasn't already perfect when he came here? Wasn't he already perfect? The word perfect here, teleon, means complete. So when Jesus came to the earth and offered himself, if you go back to verse 2, it says, he can deal gently with us who are ignorant and going astray, because Jesus can relate. A priest is a bridge. A priest is a bridge between the worshiper and the one being worshipped. And the ideal priest speaks the language both of those who are worshiping and the language of the one being worshipped. The Jews had priests. They got the human end of it, but they didn't get the God end of it so well. In fact, they were really the same as everybody else. Jesus, clearly being God, he knew the language of God, but he came here to the earth so he could speak our language. And in that sense, he was made perfect. He learned obedience, it said in chapter 4. And not that he was disobedient, but he learned what it means to be obedient, because he was tempted in every way just like us. So that brings us to our passage, which starts in the second half of chapter 6, verse 20. All right, where it says, he's become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from defeat of the kings and blessed him. Now, what we want to do is we want to go into the Old Testament. We want to find out a little bit about this guy, Melchizedek. Melchizedek is only mentioned twice in the entire Old Testament. And he's definitely not a major figure at all. In fact, you would be forgiven if you read the entire Old Testament, and if I asked who's Melchizedek, you'd say, I don't know, some guy, never heard of him. Because he's really a fairly obscure figure. Let's go to Genesis 14. Now, what we're going to do is in the next 3 minutes, we're going to learn everything there is to know about Melchizedek. The reason is there's not much to know about Melchizedek, and yet God makes a big deal out of this. So Genesis 14, let's go there and let's find out about this guy. Starting in verse 17. After Abraham returned from defeating Kedorlaomer, and by the way, the key to these things when you're saying Old Testament names, just say it really fast, sound confident, and don't worry if you said it right, because who knows how they actually pronounced it, right? Nobody, they didn't have recordings back then, so Kedorlaomer. All right, it's the official name of that guy, all right? The Elamite king. The king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveth, which is the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of the Most High God, and he blessed Abraham, saying, Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. This is all we know about Melchizedek. Number one, he's the king of Salem, which, by the way, eventually became Jerusalem. He brought bread and wine. He was the priest of Jehovah, of God Most High. He blessed Abraham, and Abraham gave him a tenth. That's all we know about this guy Melchizedek. Number one, the king of Salem. Number two, he brought bread and wine. Number three, he, despite not being a Jew, was a priest of Jehovah. He blessed Abraham, and Abraham gave him a tenth. Now, every single one of those, remember all of those. Is it on the list up there? Right. All right. Remember all those, because every single fact about Melchizedek is going to be very important in Hebrews chapter 7. Now, Melchizedek is mentioned one other time. It's in Psalm 110. Let's go there. Now, Psalm 110 must have been a really mysterious psalm for the Jews. Let's read Psalm 110, verse 4. The Lord is exalted over all the nations. Oops, did it again. That's Psalm 113. Psalm 110. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Now imagine you're David who wrote this. What did I just write? He's like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's that Melchizedek guy. You know, the priest forever. And what are we talking about here? Now, you and I know what he's talking about, right? Who's he talking about? Jesus. And the reason we can know that is you can go back to Psalm 110, verse 1 and 2, where it says, The Lord says to my Lord, Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, Rule in the midst of your enemies. So this is a royal psalm. It's a psalm about the kingship of the Messiah. So here we see that there's going to be a priest. He's going to be a priest forever, and he's going to come from the order of Melchizedek. Okay, great. Now let's go back to our main passage here. By the way, in this sermon, I don't know about you, but I like when there's a sermon, I like to go home thinking, man, I was really challenged to change my life in this way today. I'm telling you, today is not a sermon like that. And today is a sermon like, wow, the Bible is awesome, and that is so encouraging. So if you can think of a take-home lesson to change your life, even better. But this is kind of like more of a teaching than a preaching thing. We're going through all of Hebrews, right? And I just couldn't think of a way to preach Hebrews. I just got to teach Hebrews 7, all right? What can I say? So you serve up what you were given, right? I think that's what mothers say to their kids, so whatever. Okay, great. So it says he has become a high priest forever, back in chapter 6, verse 20. This Melchizedek was king of Salem, remember that? And a priest of God Most High, remember that? He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him, yes? And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. So basically, he's kind of doing what I just did, which is give that little outline up on the screen. Okay? First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. And then also king of Salem, which means king of peace. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, remains a priest forever. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of the plunder. Now the law requires the descendants of Levi who become priests to collect a tenth from the people, that is, from their fellow Israelites, even though they are also descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. And without a doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In the one case, the tenth is collected by people who die. In the other case, by him who is declared to be living. One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his descendant. Okay, so we're trying to forward the slide. There we go. So now, the Hebrew writer is trying to do two things here. First of all, he's trying to establish that the priesthood of Melchizedek is far higher in authority and value and importance than the priesthood of Levi. All right, now, I'm assuming here you know what the priesthood of Levi is, right? Which may not be a completely correct assumption. So as you probably are aware, Jacob had 12 sons, and one of them was Levi, and all the priests come through Levi. All right? And in fact, specifically, Levi had a great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson named Aaron, and Aaron is the father of all the priests. So the servants in the temple were the Levites, and a small portion of the servants in the temple who were Levites were the priesthood of Aaron. All right? And so what he's saying is, his first point is, the priesthood of Jesus is the priesthood of Melchizedek, and it's much greater than the priesthood of Aaron. The second thing he's trying to do is trying to establish that Jesus is like Melchizedek, and Melchizedek is like Jesus. So Melchizedek is greater than Aaron, Jesus is like Melchizedek, so Jesus is a high priest greater than the Jewish high priest. Okay, that's what he's trying to do. So how does he develop his argument? First of all, in chapter 7, verse 2, all right, it says that he gave a tithe to Melchizedek. So that's interesting. So Abraham is in this battle. He's trying to save his nephew's stuff who'd been taken by this Kedorlaomer, and he wins the battle. He's got all this booty, and he's coming back, and he's going to go to the king of Sodom, who should be the Lord in this situation. But instead of giving the tithe to the king of Sodom, he gives it to this mysterious guy, Melchizedek. All right? And so the argument then of the Hebrew writer is the lesser gives a tithe to the greater. Okay? So what he's saying is Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. Now, how's the average Jew going to feel about that? They're going to feel like, that's crazy. That's kind of ridiculous. All right? And then in verse 4, he says, just think how great he was. So just think how great this guy Melchizedek was. It says, even Abraham gave him a tenth. And he says, no doubt about it, the lesser, who? Abraham, gave a tenth to the greater, Melchizedek. Now, Abraham's pretty great, right? I mean, he is the father of all who are saved by faith. He's pretty awesome. So could there be any character in the Old Testament greater than Abraham? And the answer is Melchizedek. So I'm seeing that like, what's this guy talking about? Right. What's the Hebrew writer talking about? How could Melchizedek be greater than Abraham? All right, well, that's a good question. He says, without a doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. And verse 9, he says, here's the really interesting one. He says, verse 9, he says, one might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was in the body of his ancestor. Now, this is a strange argument. So, Levi, all right, is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Yeah, he's the great-grandson of Abraham. And so he says, if Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek, so Melchizedek is greater than Abraham, and if Levi is the descendant of Abraham, he says by implication, then Levi is lesser, and Melchizedek is greater. And Levi is the father of all the priests. So that's his argument. I don't think you and I would have made this argument. This is a ancient Near East kind of argument. So it says, therefore, Levi and Aaron, okay, but Melchizedek, that's a much better priesthood. All right? So the conclusion then is the priesthood of Melchizedek, and therefore of Jesus, is superior to that of Levi. And what God was doing is he's prophetically pointing to the fact that there would be a new priesthood. That's what he's doing. The life of Melchizedek is a prophetic foreshadowing, all right, that there will be a greater priesthood than that of Aaron. All right, and then what he does a whole bunch of stuff to say how Jesus, and are we doing this where I go like this and then you just hit the button? Or, oh, it's actually working. Okay, great. So then he tells us a bunch of things about Melchizedek that makes him be like Jesus. First of all, he tells us the king, Melchizedek, the name Melchizedek means righteous king. Now that's interesting because in Judaism, the kings were one thing and the priests were another thing. And the priest and the king would never be the same. So he says Melchizedek is a priest of the Most High God, but he's a king. And that's one reason he's greater than the kingship of Levi. Now, Zechariah, I'm going to get real obscure on you. If you're a Bible geek, this is your favorite sermon, all right? But if you're into like totally, man, I couldn't believe, I'm going to change my life, this may not be your favorite sermon. But if you're a Bible geek, this is an awesome sermon. So we're going to go to Zechariah 6, verse 9 through 15. Zechariah 6. It was prophesied that priest and king would be joined. It was prophesied where? In Zechariah 6. All right? The word of the Lord came to me, take silver and gold from the exiles, Heldai, Tobijah, and Jediah, who have arrived from Babylon. Go the same day to the house of Josiah, son of Zephaniah. Now, Josiah was the high priest at that time. So God says to these guys, go to his house. Take the silver and gold and make a crown. Do you put a crown on a priest's head? No, you don't do that. All right? It set it on the head of the high priest, Joshua, son of Jozadak. Tell him, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Here's the man whose name is Branch. Who in the Old Testament is known as Branch? That's Jesus. You know, there's the prophecy fulfillment in Matthew where Matthew says there's a prophecy that the Messiah will be called the Nazarene. All right, it's right there in Matthew. And skeptics say there is no Old Testament prophecy that the Messiah will be called the Nazarene. But you know, the Hebrew word for branch is Nazar. So Jesus was literally born he was born in Nazareth, right? Or he was raised. Jesus was raised in a town named Branch. All right? In fact, his followers are called the Nazarenes. So he was the branch. So this is a prophecy about the Messiah. All right, got it? Okay, here's the man whose name is the branch, in other words, Messiah, and he will branch out from the place and build the temple of the Lord. It is he who will build the temple of the Lord. He will be clothed with majesty, and he will sit and rule on his throne. He will be a priest on his throne, and there will be harmony between the two. Harmony between what? The kingship and the priesthood. In Israel, the priests never got along with the kings, and the kings never got along with the priests, because the priests wanted to run everything, and the kings wanted to run everything. Kind of like church and state, they kind of. So basically saying, so what's going to happen is there's going to be this guy called the branch, and he's going to bring the two together. And that's exactly what Melchizedek is. Melchizedek is a prefigure or a foreshadow that the Messiah will be a new kind of high priest and a king. Now, Melchizedek had the name Righteousness. How'd you like to have that name? By the way, I have a good friend. I hadn't seen him in almost 40 years. I was at a singles conference in San Diego, and his name is Pride. It's like, What kind of name is that? Who would give their kid the name Pride? His name is Pride Joseph. He's always having to live down from that name, you know what I'm saying? But how'd you like to have the name Righteousness? But you know what? The parallels between Melchizedek and Jesus, there's a long list. Have you been kind of reading up on the screen there? Or you got your YouVersion thing? Yeah, it's right there. All right. It's great stuff. So Melchizedek was called righteousness. How's Jesus similar? He is righteousness. Melchizedek had the name King of Righteousness, but Jesus actually is the King of Righteousness. He's also the King of Salem. Actually, the word's not Salem. The word is shalom. And shalom means peace. So this guy, Melchizedek, whose name means King of Righteousness, was literally King of Peace. All right? Guess who else is King of Peace? All right, Jesus. And it's sort of cool. It's like he was King of Peace. That was his name anyway, But Jesus, he was literally the King of Peace. And notice this, Melchizedek was King of Righteousness before he was King of Peace. Because righteousness comes before peace. In fact, Romans 5:1, our text this morning, thank you very much, says that righteousness, thank you, Chris, that righteousness comes before peace. And then in verse 3 he says, without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. So again, you see he's trying to establish the parallels between Melchizedek and Jesus. So who was Melchizedek's father? I don't know. Who was his mother? I don't know. Who were his kids? I don't know. Did he have any? And he's saying in that he's like Jesus. All right, because Jesus, he had no children. All right, so similar to Melchizedek, Jesus was without genealogy. All right, and then he says, a priest, but not of the family of Levi. Now, in Judaism, genealogy was everything. All right? In Judaism, to be a priest, it was genealogy. In fact, in Ezra 2, 61 through 63, it says, in order for anybody to actually be appointed as a priest, they had to give this stamped certificate saying, this person is a direct male descendant from Aaron, all the way down. By the way, if you ever have a Jewish friend whose last name is Cohen, that means they also are directly descended from Aaron. Every Jewish male who's named Cohen is a direct descendant. All right, so for the Jews, genealogy was everything. But for Jesus, genealogy was nothing. So what was his priesthood based on? And the answer, it says in Hebrews 7, it was based on a righteous life. Now, would you rather have a priest whose priesthood is based on an accident, a genetic accident? Or would you rather have a priest whose priesthood is based on the righteous life that he lived? Because why was Melchizedek taken as a priest? Because he was a righteous man. How righteous? Was he perfectly righteous? I don't know. But the biblical parallel here is Melchizedek was chosen by God because of his faith, because of his righteousness, unlike the priests of Aaron. All right, great. So, we're establishing two things. Melchizedek, much greater than Aaron, all right? And Melchizedek, just like Jesus. But every time Jesus is like Melchizedek, he's greater than Melchizedek, right? Melchizedek was called righteousness. Jesus was righteous. Melchizedek was called the King of Peace. Jesus was, in fact, the King of Peace, etc., etc., etc. All right, now let's read from verse 11 through 25. All right. If perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law given to the people established that priesthood, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek? Not in the order of Aaron. For when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also. He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe had ever served at the altar. For it is clear that our Lord Jesus descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. And what we have said is even more clear. If another priest like Melchizedek appears, one must become a priest not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life. For it is declared you are priests forever in the order of Melchizedek. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless. For the law made nothing perfect. And a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Others became priests without an oath. But he became a priest with an oath when God said to him, the Lord has sworn and he will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. Now there have been many of these priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he's able to save completely those who have come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. All right, so again, he's giving us a little bit more parallel between Jesus and Melchizedek. Then he's going to tell us why Jesus totally blows away Melchizedek. No comparison. All right, so he says in verse 13 through 16, he said Melchizedek wasn't from the tribe of Levi. In fact, he wasn't even a Jew. Isn't that interesting? A guy who wasn't a Jew who's a high priest of God. And similarly, Jesus is not of the tribe of Levi. By the way, what tribe was Jesus from? The tribe of Judah. And the Bible says nothing about priests coming from the tribe of Judah. So again, just like Melchizedek, just like Jesus, not from the right tribe. And later on, he's going to say, when we get down to chapter 9, I think it is, he's going to say, there's plenty of Levitical priests. If you needed that, Jesus wouldn't have even needed to come. All right, a few more parallels between Melchizedek and Jesus. Melchizedek was the king of Jerusalem. Melchizedek was the king of the physical city, Jerusalem. But Jesus is the king of the spiritual Jerusalem, the king of Zion, the king of the church. Notice, he gave Abraham bread and wine. So Melchizedek, the high priest, gives Abraham bread and wine. Can you think of another high priest who also gave bread and wine as a remembrance of his sacrifice? So Abraham is making a sacrifice. Melchizedek brings bread and wine. Do you think it's a coincidence that Melchizedek brought bread and wine instead of olives and, and lamb or something like that? Well, he could have brought lamb, I guess. Another thing is, Melchizedek was a priest for Gentiles. And Jesus also is a priest for the Gentiles. So what do we have so far? We have, number one, Melchizedek is much greater than Levi. Oh my goodness. Levi gave a tenth. And Jesus is just like Melchizedek. Oh, but he's much greater than Melchizedek. All right. So, great. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about why not only is Jesus like Melchizedek, Jesus is greater than Melchizedek. He says something in chapter 7, verse 11. It says, if perfection could have been obtained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law given to the people established that priesthood, why was there still a need for another priest? So the question he's dealing with is, why do we need another priest? Now remember the context. These Jews are tempted to become religious. And basically the question for us is, why is being religious not enough? Right? That's the practical question. Why is being religious not enough? Why is following a bunch of rules and regulations and laws not enough to get us to heaven? And the answer is because it never made them perfect. And the bottom line is God is holy. He lives in inapproachable light. And we need to be perfected. What was the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law was to make people holy. But it didn't work. All right? That's why we need a new priesthood. A priesthood that is perfect. It's perfect in that it's holy, but it's also perfect in the sense that it's complete. That he's the perfect high priest who knows the language of God and knows our language. That is why there is still need for another priest to come from the order of Melchizedek. All right, and then he makes something that's going to be important in chapter 8. I don't think I'm going to get that far today. Oh, I'm definitely not. He says, for when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also. So he's saying, all right, here's his argument. If we need a new priest, then we need a new covenant. And then we need a new tabernacle. And we need new sacrifices. That's the outline of Hebrews 7, 8, 9, and 10. So if we need a new priest, then we need a new covenant, chapter 8. And we need a new tabernacle, chapter 9. And we need new sacrifices, chapter 10. And in every single one of those, what Jesus has to offer is so much greater. Such a greater priest. Right? Such a greater covenant. Such a greater tabernacle that he lives in. And such greater sacrifices. That's what the next, 2 or 3 weeks of sermons we're going to be talking about. All right? So how different will this new covenant, the covenant in Jesus, be from the old covenant? It'll be as different as Melchizedek is from Levi. And he says here, it was useless. All right? That's kind of strong words here. It says it was useless. All right? Yes. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless. Now, how do you think the Jews would like for you to say their religion is weak and useless? They're not super happy about that. So that means their religion was stupid and a waste of time. No, that's not true. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 3, real fast, he says, all right, but those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. So what did the Old Testament do? It said, your sins are terrible. Every time they had the Day of Atonement, the river literally, the Kidron River that went through Jerusalem, it literally ran red with blood. It was a reminder. In Romans 7:13, it says the law made sin utterly sinful. So when you look at the law, you should go, I'm toast. Man, I'm telling you, I need something better. And where is that better thing? It's found in Jesus. Let's finish out the chapter here. Let's read Hebrews 7, 23 through 28. Now there have been many of them, many Levitical priests over the years, since death prevented them from continuing in office, but because Jesus lives forever, he is a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Such a high priest truly meets our need. One who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for the sins once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests men in all their weakness, but the oath which came after the law appointed the Son, who's been made perfect forever. So he tells us a few things that are superior about Jesus. First of all, every Levitical priest died. There were something like 68 high priests. From the time of Aaron to the time of Jesus, there were 68 high priests. They just kept dying all the time. And you're thinking, all right, this priest is going to take care of you. What happens? He dies. And then at some point, another priest, guess what happens? He dies. They kept dying and dying and dying. What a great priest. But Jesus is a priest forever. In verse 3, he says a priest forever. In verse 17, he says he's a priest forever. In verse 21, he says, guess what? He's a priest forever. In verse 16, he says he has an indestructible life. That's our priest, an indestructible life. In verse 24, it says his priesthood is permanent. It says he will always be able to save for all time. Verse 25, it says he always lives. It says in verse 28, he is perfect forever. That is the high priest that we worship. That is Jesus. That is the one who is ministering for us before the throne of God in heaven. He also says in verse 27, these stinking priests, they sinned all the time. And so before they could offer a sacrifice for you, they had to offer a sacrifice for themselves. All right? I don't know. Would you rather have a perfect priest or a sinful priest? I think I'd rather have a perfect priest. All right? And it says, the priest made a sacrifice, but look what it says here. It says, he offered himself. All right? He sacrificed for the sins once for all when he offered himself. The priest offered a bull or a goat. Jesus offered himself. It's kind of like, you ever hear about the chicken and the pig who had a discussion about breakfast? You ever hear that story? The chicken said, I really sacrificed for this breakfast. Oh, it hurt. I know it hurts the legs. I'm really not sure. I think they make a loud clucking sound, so I think it probably hurts the legs. And the chicken was thinking, boy, I really sacrificed for this breakfast. And the pig says, talk about sacrifice. Guess what's going to happen to me? All right? Jesus gave his life. That's the priest we have. That's the perfect priest who is in heaven. He says, here's what I have to offer. My life. So what's he want from us? Romans 12, 1 and 2. Offer your bodies as living sacrifice. He doesn't want you to give your physical life. He wants you to give yourself to him as a sacrifice. So this is the amazing Jesus we have, a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. A priest forever. A priest without sin. A priest who is talking to God for you. He's mediating to you for right now. We have one mediator between God and man, and that is the man, Jesus Christ, the perfect high priest. So next week we're going to learn about the covenant, and we're going to learn about the tabernacle. So thank you very much.